Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to America's daytime fun show, Development of the United States Constitution. I'm your host, Prof. Greer, and we are in week 5 of the course, and this is the lecture for Module 5 entitled Creating American Federalism. This module presents written information concerning the fight over passage of the Constitution between the two groups, which we refer to now as the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists. The title of the lecture is The Anti-Federalists and Their Influence. So let's take a look at the group who have at times been labeled as enemies of the Constitution, but I think you may have a different view of these people at the conclusion of the lecture. Let's get started. Okay, so let's start with the passing of the United States Constitution. The common notion that passing the Constitution was that the new Americans desired was a kumbaya moment, and everybody wanted the Constitution. Folks, that's just not clearly true. The Philadelphia Convention was called for the sole purpose of augmenting the Articles of Confederation. The meetings were closed to the public. There were no official transcripts written of the deliberations. The delegates were charged with not taking notes to publish their accounts of the convention. Unfortunately, several did, and one of the most famous is James Madison's account of the day-to-day workings of the Constitution. Of ratifying the Constitution, I should say. So, we now have the groundwork laid for passing the Constitution. And since we have this groundwork laid, we're now going to be introduced to the Anti-Federalists. So now we have to ask the question, who were the Anti-Federalists? Well, let's begin at the Philadelphia Convention. After everything was done, after changes were made, the deliberations were over, it was time to sign the Constitution, and they also decided to send the Constitution to all the states. And if 9 states ratified the Constitution, then it'd be passed into law. Now, there was a problem during the deliberations. There were some of those who believed there should be a Bill of Rights because of the central government. The Constitution was a document to run the country, the entire country. And then so there were 3 individuals who felt that there should be a Bill of Rights added to help protect the citizenry. 2 of them were from Virginia. George Mason, who was head of the Virginia delegation my goodness, I'm locking up for some reason. I apologize. At the Virginia Convention, right before the Declaration of Independence, and he was in charge of the convention to write up Virginia's Constitution. Edmund Randolph of Virginia was one who refused, and Elbridge Gerry of Massachusetts. These 3 men decided, no, we won't sign the Constitution without a Bill of Rights. This kicked off the idea of the Anti-Federalists. Now, they didn't call themselves that. We call them the Anti-Federalists later. But this is where it began. This is the seedbed of the Anti-Federalists and what their collective writings and then becoming a group. Okay? All right. So the ideology of the Anti-Federalists, in the Confederation Congress, the Anti-Federalists were basically in agreement with the Federalists that the Articles of Confederation required amending. They had problems with overseas relations and with collecting debt money, basically for not just the revolution, but for maintaining the national government. There were some things that needed to be paid for, and some states were sending money, some states weren't. So this is how the Anti-Federalists viewed the Articles of Confederation, that, yeah, this needs to be worked at, but we need to do it in a proper manner. The Philadelphia Convention was called not to write a new document, but to augment and fix the Articles of Confederation. So we look at what the Anti-Federalists stood for. Whether they belonged in a strong states' rights platform. So if you look at the Articles of Confederation, which we already have once, the Articles of Confederation give power to the states. It tries not to have a whole lot of power towards the central government. And that's what a confederation is. And remember, the Articles of Confederation began its penning not just a few days by John Dickinson during the Second Continental Congress. So it was during the independence movement, and it actually wasn't completely done until a couple years later. But we know that the United States is much different now than they seen it as a collection of states. And we and the collection of states being a collection of many countries. They had Virginia was different than Massachusetts. It had its own laws. It had its own way of thinking. The only way, or the only thing that made it different in the United States, is you didn't have to apply for visas to go to state. It was open, but each state had its own laws, and if you weren't familiar with them, then you were subject to the law of that state. Now, this doesn't happen very long, but we know that's what the founders, a good deal of the founders, thought this is how the United States should be. Okay? All right, let's begin by looking at some notable Anti-Federalists. You should recognize these names and know that some of them were at the Philadelphia Convention. Some weren't, but they still held a mark of importance within the beginning stage of the government of the United States. So, and these people that you're reading have written documents or written pamphlets or things of this nature, saying that the present Constitution is oppressive, and that not to ratify it. They was pleading with their own state not to ratify, but to go back and do what was supposed to be done. And some of them writings are very eloquent and very nicely done. And I didn't have you read those so much because of doing the lecture on those folks, but the best to get is any there's a couple of colleges that have some of them written. There's I have a book, and I think it's almost completely out of print now. It's a book of the Anti-Federalists, but you can find some as you go along. Okay, so if you want to on your own, read them, but just for our class purposes, we're going to go over who they are. So now I want to give you an example of the problems that were happening in the states ratifying the Constitution. Remember, the founders or the writers of the Constitution, the United States Constitution, wanted each state to hold a convention to pass the document. Not so much their state legislatures, but a specially chosen convention. Now, a lot of times they were already legislators, I should say, or people of importance. But this particular one is very interesting, the one that happened in Pennsylvania. So the ratifying convention met between November 21st and December 12th, 1787. It was one of the first conventions. There was division in the 69-member unicameral Pennsylvania legislature. Now, this convention was the legislature, okay? 69 was a unicameral, meaning it's one single body. Bicameral, as you know about our Constitution, means the bicameral being the House of Representatives and the Senate. But in Pennsylvania, it was one house, okay? So they went into the convention with a 46-23 divide among the elected delegates. After 3 weeks of non-debate, which basically was they all wrote letters. They wrote they published items, but they didn't do a whole lot of debate, floor debate. But no one changed their mind after this time, and the Constitution passed by a vote of 46-23. Now, here's what happened that many have said, that the Constitution was muscled in on some of the states. So, the 32 or the 23 in the minority, and it's called the Pennsylvania minority, requested that their objections to the Constitution be placed on the record. But the pro-Constitution Federalists refused. This is very interesting on what happened here. You can't really have open debate if you know that your colleagues who are against you or opposition to you are going to hold you down. This is a tyranny of the majority. And when you read the Federalist Papers, Madison's going to talk about the tyranny of the majority. Okay? But we're talking about the Anti-Federalists right now. So let's do a little review of them. So we know that they're state rights driven. They believe that a strong central government will oppress the people. And they believed everything could be handled at the local level, the highest level being the state. But a lot of the Anti-Federalists believe that their counties should be driven. Even their own cities had the right to override some state mandates. But it almost stopped there, because we've got to remember, the states thought themselves as little countries. So another country can't tell them what to do. They're their own country. So their ideals are pretty strong, and you would call them at the time pretty liberal, because the Federalists, because of making a constitution, this smacks of conservatism from, as we talked about, the Bill of Rights in England, the unwritten constitution in England, which is based solely on traditions and things of that nature. But it can be changed through the court system. But this is exactly what the Anti-Federalists didn't want. They didn't want a hard-written document over all of the states. They preferred a document that was written towards their country only. That is so important to remember. Okay? Okay, folks, now it's time at this lecture to talk about critical thinking. We do this with all our video lectures. At the end, we take a subject matter of what we talked about and do some critical thinking. So, the Anti-Federalists and the contemporary time we live in now. So there's probably nothing bigger right now in the year 2021 is the COVID situation, mandates when it comes to health issues and government intervention. So, as we touched upon, the Anti-Federalists held that the government of the people should be locally driven, and that the central government could be a threat to our personal rights and freedoms. As you'll read in the Federalist Papers, the central government would not allow this to happen because it would not be oppressive to the citizens. But the Anti-Federalists did not believe that at all. Taking into account the two rival camps, can you see the Anti-Federalists and why they held that the government of the people should be locally driven and that central government could be a threat to personal rights and freedoms? But let's take a look at the issue. If you're an Anti-Federalist, is it acceptable to not follow national government mandates? Should you be able to declare that only the state and local governments have the right to implement health mandates? Does the citizenry have a right to refuse or an obligation to follow issues concerning the health of all? Guys, this is something we need to be thinking about. We need to see, is health issues political? Are they or are they not? At what point is there a line crossed? At what point do we look to see what the founders thought? Or are we point that we've progressed to where, well, there's no way the Anti-Federalists would have this against smallpox. Now, smallpox was a big deal in the 18th century. But there was inoculation. It was a very painful inoculation. And the inoculation was a little bit controversial because what they did was scrape open part of the pox itself or a part on the arm, put a live pox in you, and then cover it, and then hopefully build an immunity. This was for healthy people. For people with smallpox, you just had to either wait it out. That's the problem. But anyway, that's our item of critical thinking for this lecture. There's a quiz coming up, so I want you to be aware that's possibly on the quiz. I may make the quiz a discussion. I doubt it. It's going to be more of yes or no, true, false, multiple choice. But you need to think about this. This is part of our class, folks, is using critical thinking. All right? All right, everyone. I want you to have a great week. Look at your assignments. Look at the things that are due. And if you have a problem, do not hesitate to call me and contact me. And call my office phone and contact me through email. And we will work together. All right? Okay, everybody. Have a great day.